The unexpected visitor. The morning sun streamed softly through the large windows of the small, quiet café nestled on the corner of a bustling street. Inside, the familiar warmth of freshly brewed coffee and the sweet scent of pastries filled the air. A cozy hum of conversations and clinking cups created a peaceful ambience, the kind of place where regulars came to unwind before starting their day. Amara, a diligent waitress with a kind smile and a quiet resolve, moved gracefully through her shift, attending to customers with practiced ease. Yet, beneath her composed exterior, her heart was heavy. She had been running on fumes lately, juggling long shifts and mounting bills. The rent was overdue, and the tips from the day had been meager at best. Each time she handed a check to a customer, she felt a pang of unease, hoping they would leave just enough to ease the pressure building in her life. But on this particular morning, the weight of her worries felt heavier than usual. She adjusted her brown hair into a tight bun and tucked her order pad under her arm, trying to push through another long day. The familiar rhythmic sound of the cafe doorbell chimed, signaling the arrival of a new customer. Amara glanced up, expecting to see one of the regulars she had gotten to know over time. A tired businessman, a local writer, or the young couple who always shared the same table by the window. But this time, it was different. The door swung open, and in stepped a figure who could not have been more out of place. A tall man with an unmistakable air of confidence entered the cafe, his presence commanding the room. Donald Trump, former President of the United States, was flanked by two discreet but watchful security guards. His navy blue suit, crisply tailored and sharp, contrasted with the casual atmosphere of the cafe. His signature bright red tie gleamed in the light, almost as if it had a life of its own. The room seemed to pause in that moment. Conversations faltered, eyes widened, and whispers rippled across the small space. Amara froze momentarily, unsure of how to react. This was not the type of place where high-profile figures like him usually appeared. The cafe was a refuge for quiet souls seeking a brief escape from the hectic world outside, not a backdrop for political figures. Her heart raced as she watched him make his way toward an empty table by the window, his steps deliberate and calm. Gathering herself, Amara did what she had been trained to do. She approached his table with a warm, professional smile, despite the swirl of emotion she felt. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was thumping in her chest. "What can I get for you?" Trump looked up at her, his expression calm but intense. His eyes were a striking blue, exuding both a sharpness and a quiet confidence that made Amara's pulse quicken. For a moment, it felt like the room had narrowed, leaving just the two of them in focus. "A cappuccino," he said, his voice firm but polite. "And one of those croissants," he added, gesturing toward the display case behind her. "Of course," Amara replied, nodding and quickly jotting down his order. "Anything else?" she asked, doing her best to maintain composure despite the surreal nature of the situation. He shook his head, his gaze shifting to the window, where the morning sun painted the streets in golden hues. "That'll do. Thank you." As she turned to walk away, Amara couldn't help but steal a glance back at him. He was already lost in thought, his gaze fixed on the outside world. His security team stood nearby, discreetly watching the room, but it was clear that he had no intention of engaging with anyone else. There was a quiet solitude around him, an air of someone used to being in the public eye, yet strangely detached from it. Amara moved quickly to the counter, where she prepared his cappuccino and croissant, trying to steady her nerves. She couldn't shake the feeling of serving someone so prominent, someone who had lived a life so far removed from her own. But she had a job to do, and that was all that mattered. With the cup in hand and the plate carefully balanced on the tray, she approached his table again, her heart still racing. "Here you go," she said softly, setting the cappuccino and croissant in front of him. "Enjoy." "Thank you," he replied, looking up at her once more. This time, his gaze softened, and he gave her a faint but genuine smile. It was brief, but it felt like a small acknowledgement, something that made Amara feel seen, if only for a moment. "You're welcome," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Let me know if you need anything else." As she turned to leave, she felt his eyes linger on her. It wasn't invasive, but there was something in the way he watched her, a quiet observance, as though he was taking in more than just the service she provided. She couldn't quite explain it, but it made her feel strangely exposed, as though he had seen through her calm exterior and understood the weight she was carrying. She returned to the counter, busying herself with small tasks, like wiping down tables and refilling sugar containers. Yet, no matter how much she tried to focus on her work, her thoughts kept drifting back to the man sitting at the table. She glanced at him from time to time, watching as he continued to sip his cappuccino, lost in his own world. There was an unusual energy in the air, something that made the cafe feel a little quieter, a little more reverent. As time passed, Amara noticed Trump take out a pen and write something on the receipt that had been left on the table. He folded the paper neatly, placed it under his empty cup, and stood to leave. Amara watched as he made his way toward the door, his security detail close behind him, before he paused by the exit and turned back to her. "Thank you for your service," he said, his voice calm. But there was something more in his words, something that made Amara feel both appreciated and slightly bewildered. "You're welcome," she replied, her voice a little breathless. "Take care." With a final nod, Trump exited the cafe, the door swinging shut behind him. For a moment, Amara just stood there, her mind spinning. Had that really just happened? Had she really just served Donald Trump, of all people, in the quiet little cafe she worked at? It felt like a dream, something so far removed from her reality. But then, as she approached his table to clear the dishes, something caught her eye. She saw the folded receipt, tucked neatly under the empty cup. Her heart skipped a beat as she picked it up, feeling the weight of it in her hands. She hesitated for a moment, a curiosity eating at her, and then she unfolded the paper, her breath catching in her throat. What she saw left her speechless. The tip was enormous, more than she had earned in weeks. It was the kind of amount that could solve some of her most pressing worries, the kind of generosity that was rare to come by. But it wasn't just the money that made her knees go weak. It was the note written in the corner, the words that seemed to jump off the page and wrap around her heart. "Your kindness and hard work don't go unnoticed. My family has been where you are. Stay strong. Brighter days are coming." Amara's eyes filled with tears as she read the words again, her vision blurring. It wasn't just the money. It was the recognition, the empathy, the understanding from someone she never expected. For the first time in months, Amara felt seen. Truly seen. Her knees felt weak as she sank into the chair across from where he had sat. The cafe around her seemed to fade into the background as she reread the note, letting the words sink in. It was as though, for a brief moment, the world had shifted. A powerful figure, someone who had lived a life of privilege and power, had reached across the divide to offer her a simple act of kindness. And in doing so, he had given her something far more valuable than money. It was a reminder that even in the hardest of times, even when it feels like no one notices your struggle, there are still people out there who understand. People who see you, who care. And sometimes, those small acts of compassion can be the light you need to keep going. Amara wiped the tears from her eyes, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She carefully folded the note and tucked it into her apron, knowing that this would be a memory she would hold onto for a long time. It wasn't just about the money or the tip. It was about the hope that had been sparked in her heart. And that, she realized, was worth more than anything else. Her manager, who had been watching from across the room, approached her cautiously. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. Amara nodded, her hand still clutching the receipt. "Yeah," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm more than okay." Her manager raised an eyebrow and glanced down at the note. Her expression softened. "Wow," she said quietly. "That's incredible." Amara gave a small laugh, shaking her head. I don't even know why he did this. I didn't do anything special." Her manager placed a hand on her shoulder, her voice calm and reassuring. "Sometimes people just know. They can see what you're going through, even when you think you're hiding it." As Amara sat back, the weight of the note still lingering in her hands, she felt a flicker of hope reignite inside her. This was the beginning of something new, something brighter. Brighter days were coming. She could feel it. And with that, she stood up, ready to face the day, no matter what it brought. Because sometimes, all it takes is one unexpected gesture to remind you that you're not alone. A ripple of change. The following days after the unexpected encounter were a whirlwind of emotions for Amara. Each time she stepped foot into the café, the note tucked securely in her apron felt like a tangible reminder of something larger than herself, a reminder that kindness, even from unexpected sources, could alter the course of a day, a life, perhaps even a future. It wasn't the money that lingered in her thoughts, though that too had made a significant impact. It was the words on that small receipt, simple but powerful, that had touched her heart in a way she had never anticipated. As the days went on, Amara carried that note with her everywhere, tucked into the pocket of her apron. Each time she took a moment to reread it, she felt a surge of strength, a quiet reassurance that she wasn't invisible, that despite all the struggles she faced, there were people out there who understood. The realization was transformative. It wasn't that her problems disappeared overnight, or that everything magically fell into place, but she had experienced a shift. For the first time in a long while, Amara didn't feel alone in her battle. The day after Donald Trump's visit, Amara walked into the café with a sense of quiet determination. The weight of the world hadn't been completely lifted from her shoulders, but she felt a little lighter. There was something about that note that had ignited a spark of hope inside her, and she was carrying that spark with her now as she went about her work. Her smile, once tired and strained, was now easier to offer. She made a point to greet every customer with sincerity, something that had become automatic for her over time. But now it felt like an intentional act of kindness, one that she had not fully appreciated until she received kindness from someone else. It didn't go unnoticed. Her coworkers began to comment on the subtle change they saw in her. "You've got a new energy about you," her fellow waitress, Kara, said one morning as they prepared for the breakfast rush. "Something's different." Amara smiled, a little shy but grateful for the observation. "I guess I'd just been thinking about things a little differently," she said, her voice light but filled with meaning. "I'm trying to stay positive." Kara raised an eyebrow. "Did something happen?" "You're definitely not the same Amara I've been working with." Amara hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much to share. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized how much the experience had meant to her, and how it had been the catalyst for this subtle shift in perspective. "Well," she began, her voice soft, "I had an unexpected visitor the other day. Someone I never would have imagined I'd meet." Kara looked at her, intrigued. "Who?" Amara glanced around, making sure no one else was in earshot. She leaned in a little closer. "Donald Trump," she whispered, her words carrying a touch of disbelief. Kara's eyes widened in surprise. "You're kidding me. The Donald Trump?" "Yeah," Amara said, smiling faintly at the memory. "He came in, had a cappuccino and a croissant, and left me a huge tip. But it wasn't just that. It was what he wrote on the receipt." Kara's expression softened as Amara pulled the folded paper from her apron and handed it over. Kara unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the note. When she finished reading, she looked up at Amara with wide eyes. "Wow, that's really something," Kara said quietly. "It's like he saw you. Really saw you." Amara nodded, her voice catching a little. "Exactly. It wasn't just the money. It was the fact that he acknowledged me in a way that felt like he understood. Like he knew what it was like to struggle." Kara gave her a gentle smile, a look of respect in her eyes. "That's incredible, Amara. It's nice to know that sometimes, even people who seem out of reach can see the good in others." Over the next few days, the story of Amara's unexpected encounter with Donald Trump spread through the cafe like wildfire. The customers who had been in the cafe that day whispered to one another, their voices filled with awe and curiosity. A few of them returned to the cafe just to ask her about it, eager to hear firsthand how it felt to have someone so high-profile extend such an unexpected kindness. At first, Amara was hesitant to speak too openly about the experience. She didn't want to appear as though she were bragging, or that she was overly focused on the attention she'd received. But as more people asked, she realized that sharing her story wasn't just about her. It was about the impact of small, genuine acts of kindness. It was about reminding others that they, too, could make a difference in someone's life, no matter their status or position in the world. One morning, just as the cafe began to fill with the early rush of customers, Amara was wiping down a table when an elderly woman, a regular at the cafe, approached her. The woman's name was Mrs. Lawson, and she had been coming to the cafe for as long as Amara could remember. She was the type of person who always smiled at the staff, who made small talk with anyone who sat near her, and who always left a generous tip. "You're looking different, my dear," Mrs. Lawson remarked, her wise eyes twinkling. "You seem lighter, happier even. What's the secret?" Amara smiled, surprised but grateful. "I guess it's just a new outlook on things," she replied. "I've been thinking a lot about the importance of kindness and how even small things can make a big difference." Mrs. Lawson nodded thoughtfully. "Kindness is a powerful thing, my dear," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "It can change someone's day, or even their whole life, without you ever knowing. It's like planting seeds in a garden. You may not see them grow right away, but one day, when you least expect it, you'll look up and realize they've blossomed." Amara's heart swelled with gratitude for the wisdom Mrs. Lawson shared. She had always admired the woman for her gentle demeanor, but now she saw her in a new light, like someone who had learned the true value of kindness over a lifetime. As the weeks passed, Amara began to notice subtle changes in herself and in the way she interacted with others. Her once quiet and reserved nature gave way to a more open, positive energy. She found herself more present with her customers, taking the time to chat with regulars, to offer a kind word or a listening ear. She started to smile more freely, and the burden of her worries didn't feel as heavy. It wasn't that her challenges had disappeared. They were still very much there, but she had learned that the way she carried them, and the way she saw herself, made all the difference. One afternoon, as Amara was serving a particularly busy lunch crowd, she noticed a woman sitting alone at a corner table. The woman had a tired, worn-out look about her, as if the weight of the world had settled on her shoulders. Amara, sensing an opportunity to pay forward the kindness she had received, made her way over to the table with a warm smile. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice genuine. "Can I get you anything to drink today?" The woman looked up, her eyes filled with a quiet sadness. "Just some tea, please," she replied softly. As Amara turned to head to the counter, she couldn't help but feel a tug of empathy for the woman. When she returned with the tea, she placed it gently on the table and sat down across from her for a moment. "You know," Amara began, her voice low but filled with sincerity, "sometimes it helps to talk to someone when things feel tough. You don't have to be alone with it." The woman looked at Amara in surprise, her eyes widening slightly. Then, slowly, she nodded, as if she hadn't realized she needed someone to talk to until that very moment. As they spoke, Amara listened with compassion, offering encouragement and understanding. By the time the woman left, she was smiling, a weight visibly lifted from her shoulders. And as Amara watched her walk out the door, she realized something profound. Kindness wasn't just about receiving, it was about giving. It was about offering a little light to others, even on the darkest of days. And in doing so, it created a ripple of change, one that spread farther and wider than she could ever imagine. Amara's heart felt full, her sense of purpose renewed. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a part of something bigger, something that had the power to change lives. one small act of kindness at a time. And in that moment, Amara understood. Brighter days were not just a distant hope. They were here, now, in the small gestures of humanity that connected them all. The ripple expands. The days following Amara's quiet transformation were filled with a subtle but undeniable shift. Her newfound perspective on life, sparked by the unexpected gesture of kindness from someone she never would have imagined, continued to guide her every move. The small cafe that had once felt like just another stop on her exhausting daily routine was now a space of connection and warmth. The customers she once served in a detached manner, often lost in her own thoughts, became sources of inspiration and joy. It wasn't that her struggles had vanished. Rather, Amara had learned to navigate them with a new clarity, a sense of purpose that had been elusive before. As weeks passed, Amara's interactions with her colleagues, customers, and even strangers took on a new depth. She made it a point to be present, to listen, and to offer kindness in ways that had once felt foreign to her. It wasn't always grand gestures. Sometimes it was just a small compliment, a genuine question about someone's day, or a quiet moment shared with a lonely customer who seemed to need a little extra attention. The more she gave, the more she realized how much she had to offer, and how much the simple act of kindness could transform not just another person's day, but her own. One rainy afternoon, as Amara wiped down a table near the window, a familiar face walked in. It was Mrs. Lawson, the elderly regular who had shared her wisdom with Amara weeks ago. But this time, she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by a young woman, no older than 20, with dark circles under her eyes and a distant, weary expression. Mrs. Lawson's arm was around the young woman's shoulder, guiding her gently into the cafe, as if she were offering comfort in her own quiet way. Amara's heart skipped a beat as she noticed the way Mrs. Lawson spoke softly to the woman, her hand resting gently on her back. It was the kind of caring, nurturing gesture that Amara had come to associate with the woman's warm presence in the cafe. And now, it seemed that the same compassion Mrs. Lawson had shared with Amara was being extended to someone else. As the woman sat down at a corner booth, Mrs. Lawson turned to Amara. "I'd like to introduce you to my granddaughter, Emily," she said, her voice gentle. "She's been going through a tough time, and I thought this might be a good place for her to find some peace." Amara smiled warmly, recognizing the unspoken bond of trust in Mrs. Lawson's words. "It's nice to meet you, Emily," she said, her voice soft and welcoming. Emily offered a faint smile but said nothing, her eyes tired and distant. Amara could see that she was lost in her own thoughts, struggling with something deeper than just the weight of the day. She knew that look, had seen it in the mirror far too often herself. It was the look of someone carrying a burden, but not knowing how to put it down. Without hesitation, Amara made her way over to the table, her heart guiding her actions as she sat down beside Emily. The cafe's gentle hum of conversation surrounded them, but it felt like a quiet bubble between the three women. "Is there anything I can get you?" Amara asked, her voice tender, as though she could sense the storm brewing within Emily. Emily hesitated, then shook her head. "Just some tea, please." Amara nodded, already making a mental note of the order. But as she stood to leave, something in Emily's eyes made her pause. There was a flicker there, a small spark that spoke of vulnerability and pain. It was a look that Amara had learned to recognize, one that she had seen in the mirror many times before. She could have walked away, gone back to her duties, but instead she lingered. "You know," Amara began gently, "sometimes all it takes is a little kindness to start feeling better. You don't have to carry it all alone, you know." Emily looked at her, startled by the sudden connection. She didn't respond immediately, but the softness in her eyes shifted, just enough to let Amara know she was listening. Amara smiled, a quiet reassurance in her expression, before she turned and headed to the counter to prepare the tea. When she returned with the cup, she placed it carefully in front of Emily. The silence between them was comfortable now, the kind of quiet that spoke volumes without the need for words. Amara sat for a moment longer, just offering her presence. Nothing more, nothing less. Sometimes that was all it took. A simple act of sitting with someone, of letting them know they weren't alone. After a long moment, Emily spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I've been feeling so lost lately," she confessed. "I don't know where to start or how to fix things. Everything just feels heavy." Amara listened intently, her heart aching with empathy for the young woman. "I understand," she said softly. "Sometimes the hardest part is just getting through the day, one step at a time. But you don't have to do it alone. And it's okay to not have everything figured out right now." Emily's eyes shimmered, and Amara could see the tears beginning to form. But she didn't push. She simply let Emily feel whatever she needed to feel, her presence a steady anchor in the storm. Mrs. Lawson, who had been quietly observing from across the table, placed a hand on her granddaughter's arm. "You see, my dear," she said, her voice filled with love and wisdom, "kindness is not just something you receive. It's something you give too. When you're ready, you'll find that giving it away can be just as healing as receiving it." Emily nodded slowly, wiping away a tear, and for the first time since entering the café, her face softened. "I'll try," she whispered. "I'll try." Amara smiled and stood up, silently acknowledging the shift in the room, the subtle transformation that had taken place. She could see it in Emily's eyes, the beginnings of hope, the spark of something new. It wasn't fixed yet, but it was a start. As Amara moved away to check on the other customers, she found herself reflecting on how far she had come since the day Donald Trump had visited the café. That one small act of kindness had rippled out into her world, touching others in ways she had never expected. It wasn't just a tip or a note that had changed things for her. It was the realization that kindness, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, had the power to heal and transform. She had seen it in her own life, and now she was witnessing it in Emily's. Over the following weeks, Amara's world continued to expand, not in the sense of material success or recognition, but in her ability to connect with others on a deeper level. She made it a point to listen, to really listen, to her customers, her friends, and even strangers who crossed her path. She began to notice the small moments of vulnerability in the people around her, and she no longer felt the need to shy away from them. Instead, she reached out with a kind word, a compassionate gesture, or simply the gift of presence. And the more she gave, the more she received. One afternoon, as Amara prepared for another busy shift, her manager, Sam, approached her with a thoughtful look in his eyes. "Amara," he said quietly, "I've been noticing something in you lately. You've been different, more engaged, more connected. I wanted to let you know how much I appreciate that. You're making this place feel warmer, like it's more than just a cafe. And it's not going unnoticed." Amara felt a swell of gratitude rise within her, a humble smile forming on her lips. "Thank you, Sam," she replied, her voice steady and sincere. "I've just been trying to give a little more of myself. It feels right, you know." Sam nodded, a knowing look crossing his face. "I know exactly what you mean. It's the small things, Amara. And I can see you're making a difference." Amara's heart swelled with pride, not for the recognition, but for the realization that her actions were creating ripples that reached farther than she could ever imagine. She was no longer just a waitress in a small cafe. She was a part of something much bigger, something that had the potential to transform lives, one act of kindness at a time. And as she continued to serve her customers, offer comfort, and share compassion, Amara knew that the ripple of change was only just beginning. She had learned, in the most unexpected of ways, that kindness was the key to unlocking a brighter future, not just for herself, but for everyone around her. And that was a gift she would carry with her for the rest of her life. The full circle. As the months went by, Amara's life began to change in ways she had never imagined. Her outlook had shifted, not because the world around her had drastically altered, but because she had started to see it differently. The struggles that once seemed insurmountable had become more manageable. The challenges of everyday life, late rent, long shifts, uncertain futures, were still present, but now she faced them with a heart that was open, with a spirit that had learned to endure, and with a smile that carried the weight of new understanding. She had learned that kindness didn't always come in grand gestures or dramatic moments. Sometimes it was as simple as offering someone a warm drink on a cold day, or sharing a quiet moment with someone who was hurting. And sometimes kindness was about recognizing that the people around you had their own battles, their own burdens, and that a small gesture could make all the difference in the world. Amara's story, which had started with an unexpected encounter with a former president, had become something much bigger than she ever expected. It was about the impact of small acts of compassion, about the power of seeing one another, truly seeing one another, and acknowledging the shared humanity that connected them all. She had learned that while kindness could heal, it could also inspire. Her own transformation had rippled outward, touching not just the customers in the cafe, but her coworkers, her friends, and even strangers who crossed her path. One evening, as the cafe was winding down for the night, Amara found herself sitting at the counter, sipping a cup of tea as she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The cafe was quieter than usual, the hum of conversation replaced by the soft clinking of cups and the rustling of napkins being folded. It was in this moment of stillness that Amara realized something profound. The kindness she had given had not only helped others, it had helped her find herself. The door chimed softly, and a familiar face entered the cafe. It was Emily, the young woman whom Mrs. Lawson had introduced her to months ago. This time, Emily walked in with a confident smile on her face, her steps lighter, her demeanor more at ease. Amara's heart warmed at the sight of her, and without thinking, she stood up and waved. "Emily, it's so good to see you," Amara said, her voice filled with warmth. Emily smiled, her eyes bright. "I've been meaning to come by. I just wanted to thank you." "Amara, you have no idea how much that moment in the cafe meant to me. You helped me realize that I didn't have to carry everything alone. I started seeing things differently, too. I've made progress, and I've found a new job. Things are looking up." Amara's heart swelled with pride as she hugged Emily, feeling the weight of her words. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You did it. You took the first step, and look how far you've come." Emily laughed softly. "I couldn't have done it without that little bit of kindness you showed me that day. You helped me see that sometimes you just need someone to believe in you, even if it's just for a moment." Amara smiled, her heart full. "And you believed in yourself. That's the most important part." As Emily settled into a seat by the window, Amara returned to her work, but her thoughts lingered on the conversation. She realized that the ripple of kindness she had started was not just about helping others. It was about creating a community of support and understanding. It was about building bridges where there had once been walls, about fostering a culture of empathy where people didn't just go through their days as strangers, but as fellow human beings who cared for one another. The cafe, once just a place to earn a living, had become a sanctuary, an oasis of shared kindness, where people could come, not just for coffee, but for a moment of connection. And that connection was what made all the difference. Amara stepped outside for a brief moment, breathing in the cool night air. She looked up at the stars, and for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. She knew that life was never going to be without its challenges, but she had learned that it was how we faced those challenges, with kindness, with strength, and with love, that made all the difference. In that moment, Amara understood the real lesson of her journey. Kindness is a ripple that never truly fades. It continues to expand, quietly touching the lives of others, long after the first wave has passed. And in giving, we receive the most profound gift of all, the reminder that we are all in this together. And with that, Amara turned back toward the cafe, ready to serve another customer, ready to offer another small gesture of kindness, knowing that the world was a little brighter for it, because sometimes the simplest acts of compassion can change everything, both for the person who receives it and for the one who gives it.